Welcome back to the Life with the Browns. At first, it didn't look like a confrontation.
It looked like a showing.
Yeah, 30, 31, 31. Someone muttered casually as they stepped inside. Look at this, lovely upstairs, downstairs. Pretty little decoration. It felt almost staged. Polite. Domestic. Controlled. But according to insiders, the mood shifted the second the number hit the table. Not $2 million in assets. Not $2 million in land value. $2 million in debt. Loan documents.
Clean. Cold.
Unspinnable. No wiggle room. No way to reframe it into a long-term investment strategy. The paperwork reportedly came through a trusted channel, airtight, undeniable. And that's when Kody Brown's expression changed. One witness said his face could have cut glass. Another described the silence before the storm, thick, loaded, vibrating under the surface. For a split second, he didn't speak. Then he exploded. He was pacing, hands slicing the air, voice rising with every sentence. Who signed this? When? Why wasn't I told? The sheer size of the debt had blindsided him. But what truly set him off wasn't just the number. It was Christine. Because while he unraveled, she didn't. She reportedly sat back in her chair, arms crossed, calm, composed, almost clinical. Not angry, not frantic. If anything, faintly amused. And then she delivered the line that would echo through every corner of the Brown family grapevine. Math doesn't lie.
No yelling. No finger pointing.
Just numbers. And if the whispers are true, Christine had been preparing for this moment long before that meeting. The loan didn't shock her. She had already followed the trail. She had already done the work. She had already accepted the truth. She was simply waiting for the day Kody would have to face it without excuses. But Kody wasn't ready to face it. Words like betrayal and setup reportedly flew out of his mouth. His anger wasn't just about debt, it was about optics. $2 million in the red meant questions. From the family. From fans. Maybe even from creditors. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The property allegedly tied back to Robyn's household, the so-called favorite wife home base, which meant every dollar attached to that mortgage could be interpreted as communal resources flowing disproportionately in one direction. For Kody, that narrative was radioactive. For Christine, it was confirmation. While he raged, she held eye contact, voice steady, almost detached. The numbers are the numbers, she reportedly said. Yelling doesn't change them. But if Kody thought the loan was the bombshell, he was mistaken. It was only the opening act. Because Christine had something far more devastating than a spreadsheet. She had a timeline. For years, Christine had been painted as the emotional wife, the reactive one, the one who led with feelings instead of strategy. Those who truly knew her insist that image was wildly inaccurate. Decades inside the Brown household taught her something critical. Patience is more powerful than rage.
Anger burns fast.
Evidence lasts forever. Long before that infamous $2 million figure hit the table, Christine had been quietly observing. Not snooping. Not scheming. Paying attention. And in a family where finances were tangled like an overstuffed filing cabinet, paying attention meant everything.
Who signed which checks?
Which bills mysteriously stalled, which accounts were suddenly tight, and which never seemed to run dry, who was asked to tighten their belts, and who wasn't. Sources claim Christine began her own quiet audit years before her official split from Kody. No accountants in suits, no legal subpoenas, just notebooks, screenshots, printouts folded into drawers, quick photos of statements sliding across kitchen counters. She listened when the kids mentioned another delivery at Robyn's house. She noticed when large payments cleared right before holidays. She clocked which properties advanced and which stalled indefinitely. And here's the real twist. When Christine once said, "I wanted to run. I wanted to change the law," many assumed it was emotional, dramatic even. But insiders suggest it wasn't just about relocation. It was about leverage. Utah represented more than geography. It represented jurisdiction, legal structure, a different playing field. Because when you've been tracking numbers quietly for years, you don't just want distance. You want accountability. By the time that $2 million mortgage surfaced, Christine wasn't reacting. She was confirming. And that's what made Kody's outburst so revealing. It wasn't simply shock. It wasn't confusion. It was the realization that the emotional wife had come armed with receipts. And receipts don't yell. They don't argue. They don't get flustered. They just sit there, unmovable. The real question isn't whether the debt existed. The real question is how long Christine knew. And if this was only the appetizer, what exactly was she saving for the main course? Welcome back to the Life with the Browns. Over time, those little fragments Christine collected, the printouts, the passing comments, the timing of payments, began to form something undeniable. A narrative. And in her version of that narrative, the ending was never going to be kind to Kody or to his fourth wife. One insider described Christine's patience as unsettling. Not because she was aggressive, but because she wasn't. She never stormed into rooms waving receipts. Never slammed binders onto countertops demanding answers. She waited, like a chess player holding a checkmate, not announcing it, not rushing it, just watching the board until the exact right move presented itself. That move came the moment the mortgage records became too public to bury. A $2 million home loan. In Robin's name, with signatures allegedly linking back to shared family funds. It wasn't just suspicious. It was symmetry. Every note Christine had quietly tucked away. Every odd payment. Every tight budget speech given to some wives but not others. It all clicked together like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. And suddenly, this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about pattern. Kody, of course, saw it differently. According to sources, he confided to more than one family member that Christine was weaponizing numbers to humiliate him, that she was shaping a narrative to paint herself as the wounded party and him as the villain. There were even mutterings that she was positioning herself strategically, that by framing him as the bad man, she could exit cleanly, sympathetic, untouchable. As one cutting remark reportedly echoed, if she leaves a good man, most guys are going to think it's risky. But if she leaves a bad man, that's a different story. And then came the line that cut deeper than any spreadsheet, a knife in the kidneys over all these years. Kody saw betrayal. Christine saw exposure. Because from her perspective, she wasn't creating humiliation. She was revealing it. Math doesn't lie, she had said. And she meant it. She didn't dramatize. She didn't exaggerate. She simply placed the $2 million loan beside the family's existing obligations and allowed the contrast to speak. And what it seemed to say was uncomfortable. While every wife had, at some point, benefited from the communal pot, there was a growing sentiment, especially among the older children, that Robin's household often benefited more frequently and more generously. A lavish Christmas here. A sudden upgrade there. A shopping spree that didn't match the belt-tightening speeches delivered elsewhere. And now, a $2 million mortgage. When Christine laid out her notes, the implication wasn't shouted. It hovered. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. Then things reportedly turned even more personal. Sources claim Christine had documentation suggesting that communal funds may have helped service not just the mortgage itself, but also property taxes, home upgrades, and high-end decor purchases tied to that property. Nothing criminal. Nothing that would bring flashing lights to the driveway. But enough to spark ethical questions. And in a plural family built on the promise of equality, of shared sacrifice and shared reward, ethical fractures can be just as devastating as legal ones. Because this wasn't about whether something was illegal. It was about whether it was fair. So when Kody heard Christine calmly reference that $2 million figure, what truly rattled him wasn't the debt itself. It was the story the number told. A story where leadership looked reckless. Where priorities appeared lopsided. Where communal trust seemed conditional. Christine understood that stories shape reputations. And she didn't rush this one. She let it simmer. But here's what Kody didn't fully grasp. The math wasn't the most damaging part of Christine's quiet investigation. Numbers can be debated. Interpretations can be challenged. Narratives can be reframed. What she had beyond the spreadsheets, that couldn't be spun so easily. Because if the mortgage revealed a financial imbalance, what she uncovered next threatened to detonate something far more fragile than money. It threatened the foundation of loyalty itself. Welcome back to the Life with the Browns. If the $2 million mortgage was a grenade tossed onto the table, what Christine revealed next was dynamite. Because this wasn't just about debt. It was about movement. The family meeting had already turned suffocating. Kody pacing, arms folded tight across his chest like he could physically shield himself from what was coming. Robin sitting rigid, wide-eyed, lips pressed into that thin line she wore whenever she felt cornered. And Christine?
Calm.
Almost soft. Her voice steady, measured, like she was narrating something ordinary instead of dismantling the financial structure Kody had insisted was transparent for years. She started with a single word: transfers. The temperature in the room reportedly changed instantly. In a family like the Browns, transfers could mean anything. Grocery money shifting between accounts, a quick reimbursement, a routine shuffle, or something much bigger. Christine claimed she had been tracking several of these movements quietly over the past few years. Transfers that never appeared during family budget discussions. Transfers that didn't align with the "we all need to tighten our belts" speeches. Her tone never sharpened, but each sentence seemed to land heavier than the last. Then she said another word: PayPal. Not suspicious on its own, just a platform. Convenient.
Common.
But everyone in that room understood what it also was.
Fast.
Discreet. Harder to casually trace. Christine alleged she had followed nearly $500,000, $497,000 to be exact, flowing through a PayPal account tied to a name most of the family didn't even recognize. That name, she explained, was connected to a small LLC registered in Flagstaff. On paper, the LLC's purpose sounded harmless enough: event coordination and household management services. But according to Christine's notes, there were no visible events, no client lists, no advertising, no social presence. What there were, however, were expenditures: luxury furniture, private school tuition, high-end decor, large purchases that coincided almost perfectly with visible upgrades in one specific household. Christine never directly accused anyone in the room. She didn't have to, because as she calmly laid out her cross-referencing, PayPal timestamps aligned with delivery dates, expense spikes overlapping with certain property improvements, her gaze reportedly lingered just long enough on Robin to make the implication deafening. Kody broke first. His voice climbed in pitch, words tumbling over each other as he insisted it was irrelevant, misunderstood, taken out of context, that there were explanations, always explanations. Christine didn't raise her voice. She simply spread her notes across the table like receipts on a kitchen counter after a long day of shopping. Methodical.
Precise.
The message wasn't dramatic. It was devastatingly simple. Communal funds appeared to be moving through a private channel, primarily benefiting one branch of the family tree. That's when the atmosphere shifted from tense to personal. The older kids in the room reportedly didn't hide their reactions. One muttered, "Mom always said," under their breath. Another rolled their eyes, so hard it was almost audible. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about spreadsheets or loans. It was about years of whispered frustrations. About Christmas mornings that felt uneven. About conversations that didn't add up. About sacrifices some households were asked to make while others quietly expanded. Christine hadn't stormed in accusing anyone of theft. She had done something far more strategic. She had presented a pattern. And patterns are harder to dismiss than accusations. Kody could argue a number. He could reinterpret a mortgage. He could spin a narrative. But transfers? Timestamps? A registered LLC with minimal visible activity and nearly $500,000 flowing through it? That wasn't emotion. That was structure. And the unspoken question now hung over the table like smoke. If this much could be traced, what else hadn't been discussed? Because Christine wasn't done. And the most explosive part of her quiet investigation? It wasn't the money.
It was who knew about it.
Welcome back to the life with the Browns. What happened next didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a map being unfolded. At one point, someone tried to lighten the mood, gesturing to a decorative board on the wall.
This is where you put pins, they said.
To show where you're from. Our home is fun in the sun. Everything here is about fun in the sun. But the symbolism was almost too perfect, because Christine wasn't talking about vacation memories. She was talking about financial pins. And she was about to show exactly where they landed. Robin's voice reportedly trembled as she tried to steady the narrative. If money had moved, she insisted, it was for family-approved purposes. Nothing secret, nothing improper. Christine's reply was quiet. If it was approved, why wasn't it discussed? That was the moment Kody's composure finally shattered. He accused her of being vindictive, of trying to destroy him financially in front of their children, of weaponizing paperwork to humiliate him publicly.
Christine didn't flinch.
You call it destruction, she said evenly. I call it transparency. And then the room shifted again, because she hinted that the PayPal transfers and the LLC were not the full story. They were the middle layer. The middle layer, she repeated softly, as if describing a cake. The top layer? Assets no one in that room had ever heard of. Silence reportedly settled over the table. Even the older kids stopped whispering. Kody stood still for the first time all evening. Christine leaned forward, clasped her hands, and spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had waited years for this exact moment. There's another layer, she said, and I didn't want to bring it up without proof. Now, she had proof. She began with property records, public, searchable, undeniable. She explained how she'd routinely checked the county assessor's database over the years. At first, just to monitor their shared land parcels. But then she started noticing unfamiliar names, entities,
Trusts.
connections tied to Kody and Robin that had never appeared on any official family asset discussions. Then she dropped the detail that reportedly sucked the air from the room. A 3-bedroom vacation cabin in Sedona, purchased outright.
No mortgage.
Held under the name of a trust allegedly linked to one of Robin's relatives. Kody's jaw tightened. Christine continued. She claimed the timing of certain PayPal transfers aligned almost perfectly with the cabin's purchase, including a cashier's check issued within a week of a significant withdrawal. It's funny how dates line up when you start paying attention, she said softly. The softness made it sharper. And she still wasn't finished. From her bag, she pulled a slim, worn folder and slid it across the table. Inside were printed invoices and screenshots. Luxury handbags. High-end electronics. Designer furniture. A custom dining table allegedly worth more than some people's cars. All shipped to AP. Oh, Box in Flagstaff. All paid in full. All, according to Christine, routed through the same LLC she had already connected to Robin.
No screaming. No dramatic accusations.
Just documentation. Robin reportedly looked stunned, repeating that she had felt exiled before, misunderstood, hated by some and loved by others. That she had sacrificed too. But the emotional defense didn't erase the timestamps. It didn't explain the trust. It didn't answer the question hovering over everyone at that table. If communal money helped fund private assets that were never disclosed, what did that mean for the foundation of this family? Because this was no longer about jealousy, or favoritism, or even debt. It was about disclosure. About whether the plural family's promise of shared sacrifice had quietly shifted into selective privilege. And the most devastating part? Christine didn't present herself as furious. She presented herself as informed. There were no threats.
No ultimatums.
Just a quiet, controlled unveiling. If the $2 million mortgage cracked the surface, and the $497,000 in transfers fractured it further, then the Sedona cabin and the luxury trail attached to it threatened to split the foundation entirely. And the question now wasn't whether Kody was angry. It was whether he could explain it. Because in that room, surrounded by children old enough to understand numbers and timelines, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. Welcome back to the life with the Browns. Robin shook her head almost immediately. Those purchases?
Gifts.
Investments. Things meant to benefit the household in the long run. But Christine didn't allow the explanation to float unchallenged. Investments are for the family, she said evenly. Not for one branch to enjoy, while the rest of us scrape by. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Around the table, the kids shifted. The tension wasn't abstract anymore. It was personal. Finally, one of them asked the question that had clearly been sitting heavy for years. Is this why there wasn't money for the land payments? For a split second, no one spoke. Kody answered quickly, too quickly. He insisted the two things were unrelated. Completely separate. Different buckets. Different purposes. But insiders say his voice cracked just enough to make everyone wonder if he believed it himself. And that's when Christine revealed what many would later call her trump card. From the same worn folder, she pulled out a blurry but unmistakable photo.
Kody.
Standing at a luxury SUV dealership. Paperwork in hand. According to Christine, the vehicle wasn't registered in his personal name. It wasn't even under one of the known family entities. It was allegedly registered under the same trust that owned the Sedona cabin. And the timing? Just days after he'd gathered the family to talk about tightening belts, cutting back, sacrificing together. The air in the room reportedly shifted. Not dramatically, just subtly, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. Because this wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about trust. Years of carefully curated unity, the image of a cooperative, faith-driven family navigating life together, seemed to splinter right there at the kitchen table. Christine leaned back slightly, almost smiling, not out of joy, but out of certainty. If you think that's all, she said quietly, you're not ready for what's next. That's when the conversation moved from hidden purchases to hidden structure. She hinted that some assets weren't just concealed, they were possibly arranged in ways designed to obscure ownership entirely. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to open something that couldn't be closed again. Then she tapped the folder. We're not just talking about hidden property, she said. We're talking about how it's being hidden. Over the years, Christine explained, she'd become surprisingly fluent in something she never expected to study, in corporation filings, public business records, corporate registrations. She claimed she had identified at least 3 LLCs formed within the past 4 years. None of them appeared on any shared family asset list. That alone was concerning, but it was the details that made the room go silent. First red flag. The managers listed on those filings weren't Kody or Robin directly. They were individuals tied to Robin's extended family. Long-time business contacts. Names adjacent to the inner circle but not the core. Second red flag. The LLCs were registered in states known for loose corporate disclosure laws. Places where ownership structures can be layered, shielded, obscured. And then Christine lowered her voice. So low that, according to one person present, it felt like even the walls might be listening. One of them, she said carefully, isn't even registered in the US. That statement didn't explode. It landed, heavier than anything before it. Because at that point, the issue wasn't favoritism. It wasn't uneven Christmas budgets. It wasn't even a $2 million mortgage. It was the possibility that the family's financial web stretched far beyond what anyone at that table had been told. Kody immediately pushed back, calling it speculation, misinterpretation, paranoia. He accused Christine of building a conspiracy out of paperwork she didn't fully understand. But here's what made it different this time. Christine wasn't speculating wildly. She was referencing filing numbers, registration dates, entity IDs. Not accusations, records. And in that moment, the dynamic shifted permanently. Because even if every single explanation Kody offered turned out to be legitimate, the secrecy alone had already done damage. Plural marriage, as they had always framed it, depended on trust, on shared sacrifice, on collective decision-making. And now, sitting in that room, the unspoken realization settled over everyone. If structures had been built quietly, if assets had been layered carefully, if money had moved strategically, Then unity hadn't cracked overnight. It had been eroding for years.
And Christine?
She wasn't yelling. She wasn't pleading.
She was documenting.
And documentation is much harder to dismiss than emotion. Welcome back to the life with the Browns. Then Christine said a word no one expected to hear at a family kitchen table. Belize. You don't go offshore, she explained calmly, unless you're either expanding something very big or trying to answer far fewer questions at home. The room went still. Belize wasn't the name of a cousin. It wasn't a vacation memory. It was a jurisdiction. And suddenly, this wasn't just a family disagreement. It sounded like infrastructure. Kody immediately dismissed it as paranoia, a stretch, a misunderstanding of how business works. Christine didn't blink. She began laying out documents tying one of the LLCs to a sequence of wire transfers, large, six-figure movements flowing in and out of the same account she had already connected to the PayPal trail. The amounts, she pointed out, were always perfectly rounded. $100,000, $250,000, $300,000. People don't move exactly $100,000 unless they're trying to make books look clean for someone, she said evenly. Robin's face reportedly drained of color. She murmured something about business opportunities, private investors, diversification. Christine had already moved on. Next came parcels of raw land purchased under the name of a shell company, a company that, according to public records, dissolved in less than a year. And the timing? The purchase dates aligned almost exactly with the sale of one of the family's former Utah properties. A property Kody had publicly claimed barely broke even. Christine's tone never sharpened. She didn't dramatize. She simply placed dates next to dates. Transfers next to filings. Sales next to acquisitions. Piece by piece. And with each piece, the picture darkened. Then she said the sentence that reportedly froze even the kids mid-breath. If half of what I'm seeing is accurate, the money wasn't just diverted. It may have been moved in ways that draw attention. She clarified she wasn't accusing anyone of a crime. Yet, she added quietly. But she said there were patterns here that would make an auditor very interested. That's when Kody slammed his palm against the table. Speculation. Character assassination. An attempt to turn the children against him. But the outburst came too late. Because by now, the issue wasn't whether Christine was right. It was whether she might be. She calmly closed the folder, looked around the table, and delivered the line that shifted the ground beneath everyone. If you think the IRS is scary, she said, wait until you hear what the state's been asking about. The temperature in the room seemed to drop again. Even Kody, who had been defensive and inflated with indignation all night, leaned back slightly, jaw tight, silent now, calculating. Christine let the silence stretch. Not too long, just long enough. Then she reached into the folder and pulled out a plain white envelope. Official, windowed, unremarkable. But in that moment, it might as well have been ticking. This, she said, sliding it to the center of the table, isn't from the IRS. Her eyes never left Kody. It's from the Arizona Department of Revenue. Robin instinctively reached for it. Christine's hand moved first. You can read it later, she said calmly. For now, I'll summarize. On the surface, it was routine. A notice regarding discrepancies in reported income for a specific tax year. A request for clarification. Documentation. Reconciliation of numbers that didn't appear to align. Routine. Except nothing about this evening felt routine anymore. Because the discrepancies mentioned in that notice, they overlapped with the same year as the rounded six-figure transfers, the dissolved shell company, the Sedona cabin purchase, the luxury SUV. And suddenly, this wasn't just about hidden assets.
It was about reporting.
It was about whether the numbers presented publicly, to family, to viewers, to authorities, told the full story. Christine didn't accuse. She didn't threaten. She simply placed the envelope on the table and said, I didn't bring this here to destroy anyone. I brought it because if there are questions coming, the kids deserve to know why. And that's when it truly shifted. Not from financial scandal, but to legacy. Because money can be explained. Transfers can be justified. LLCs can be structured legally, but when state agencies start asking questions, silence stops being strategy. It becomes risk. And for the first time that night, Kody wasn't shouting. He was thinking. And that silence was louder than anything he'd said before. At first, Christine said she assumed the letter had to be a mistake. A clerical error. A misfiled number. A routine notice sent to the wrong address. But then she checked the year. And the year in question lined up almost perfectly with one of the major property sales and one of the large LLC transfers she had just outlined. That's when she stopped assuming. Her voice lowered, drawing everyone in. "The state doesn't send letters like this for no reason," she said quietly. "They're not fishing. They already have the numbers. They just want to see if your version matches theirs." Kody leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, face carefully blank. But insiders say there was a tiny twitch in his jaw, a small tell that betrayed the calm exterior. Robin jumped in quickly. Maybe it was a clerical mix-up, a wrong social security number, a simple paperwork glitch. Christine gave a small, knowing smile. Not cruel, just experienced. "If it's just an error," she replied casually, "then you've got nothing to lose." A pause. But timing doesn't lie. Then she added another piece. A second letter, sent 2 months later. Only this time, it wasn't addressed to Kody. It was addressed to one of the LLCs. And the registered agent listed? The same cousin of Robin's who had already appeared on multiple filings. "That's a pattern," Christine said flatly. And patterns make investigators curious, especially when the same family name keeps showing up in the same kind of paperwork. The room fell silent. The hallway clock ticking louder than anyone's breathing. Nobody needed her to spell it out. When investigators start pulling threads, they don't stop at one. Kody tried to redirect, talking about how the family had always been misunderstood, how outsiders twisted things, how scrutiny came with public life. But Christine wasn't letting him steer anymore. She leaned forward. "If you think this is just about taxes," she said, "what I found next makes that look like spare change."
No build-up. No theatrics.
From her folder came photocopied deeds and bank statements, all stamped with the same dates. "I wasn't even looking for this," she said, tapping the stack. "I found it while checking parcel numbers for Coyote Pass." One of those parcel numbers, she explained, led to something else entirely. A separate property, 40 miles outside Flagstaff. Not just vacant acreage. Purchased in cash. And the very next day, a $2 million loan taken out against it. Even Mary, who had stayed carefully neutral, shifted in her seat. Christine fanned the documents out, so the dates aligned perfectly. Purchase recorded. Loan recorded the next day. Lender, not a traditional bank. Private equity firm out of Phoenix. The kind of high-interest, short-term financing people use when they don't want banks asking too many questions. Robin interjected quickly. "That doesn't make it shady. Lots of people use private lenders to skip red tape." Christine nodded once. "Sure," she agreed. "But when the loan dates match deposits into the same LLC account we already discussed, and then large chunks disappear into out-of-state transfers, that's not family bills. That's not taxes." A pause. "That's something else." The math hovered over the table like smoke. $2 million isn't pocket change. It's not something you misplace. And the repayments on a loan like that? They could swallow more than the family's yearly income. "Math doesn't lie," Christine repeated softly. Kody finally leaned forward, voice low, simmering. "You don't know what those funds were for." Christine didn't flinch. "You're right. I don't know every detail. But I do know none of us were told that property existed. None of us agreed to that loan. And yet the repayments are coming from accounts tied to all of us." Her gaze swept the table. "That means we're all on the hook." Mary spoke then, cutting through the tension. "And what happens," she asked carefully, "if the person holding that loan wants their money back sooner than expected?" Christine let out a short, humorless breath. "They take the property," she said. "And if the collateral ties into anything else inside that LLC, they take that too. That's how these lenders operate. They don't wait. They move fast." The idea hit like a lightning strike. A concealed $2 million loan threatening not just one property, but potentially others connected to the same entity. And Christine still wasn't done. She leaned back slightly, letting the weight settle before delivering the final piece. I also found something in the lender's filings, she said. Something tied to a name I'm pretty sure you won't want to hear. Silence stretched. Then she slid one last page across the table. The print was faint, but the letterhead was visible. Managing partner, Glenn Harkness. The reaction was immediate. Mary blinked, lips parting slightly, before closing again. Kody's jaw flexed, a vein pulsing at his temple. Robin's carefully practiced calm cracked, just a flicker. Recognition. Maybe even fear. And Christine noticed. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't gloat. She simply held Robin's gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Because whatever that name meant,
It meant something.
and in that kitchen, surrounded by documents, dates, and dissolving trust, one truth had become impossible to ignore. This wasn't chaos. It was structure. And structures don't collapse because of one bad day. They collapse because of what's been quietly built underneath them for years. Oh, that name rings a bell. Christine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. For anyone who had done even a little digging, Glenn Harkness wasn't just another quiet investor with a polished website and a Phoenix office address. His wealth came from commercial real estate, office parks, warehouse flips, distressed properties turned profitable overnight. But his reputation? That was built in the shadows. Harkness was known as a fixer. The man people called when banks said no. When timelines had to shrink. When assets needed to move quietly.
No convictions.
No formal charges. Just a long trail of complicated deals that no one ever seemed eager to revisit. Christine's tone stayed steady, but each word felt heavier than the last. Harkness structures loans differently, she explained. He doesn't just secure the property that signs the papers. He builds in protections so if one asset falls short, he can reach into anything connected to that same LLC. A beat. If he decides that property isn't enough to cover his investment, he can go after everything tied to it, including Coyote Pass. Robin's composure finally cracked. That's not going to happen, she snapped. Glenn's a friend. He understands this is long-term. Christine lifted her hand gently, stopping her. A friend, she repeated. Interesting. She tapped the paperwork again. Because the borrower listed here isn't Coyote Pass LLC. And it's not the family trust. Her eyes locked onto Robin. It's Brown Holdings LLC. Yours. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. If the loan had been taken under Robin's separate entity, but repaid using funds flowing through shared family accounts, that wasn't just messy. It was explosive. Kody's voice rose, frustration cracking through his earlier restraint. You're acting like we're tied to some mob boss. This is business. These kinds of deals happen all the time. Christine tilted her head slightly, almost sympathetically.
Sure.
And you know what else happens all the time? She asked softly. People lose everything because they believe a handshake protects them from someone who writes his own rules. No one argued. Because this wasn't about just a hidden property anymore. It was about who they were financially entangled with. A man known for moving fast the moment a borrower stumbled, and walking away with far more than anyone intended to give. Christine closed her folder and slid the copies toward Kody. Keep them, she said. You'll need them. Because if Harkness calls that loan early, no amount of smiling for cameras is going to save what's left. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. And before you accuse me of being dramatic, she added calmly, remember, math doesn't lie. And neither do public records. The door creaked shut behind her. Silence. Then, just above a whisper, Robin muttered to Kody, I told you we shouldn't have involved him. That was the moment everything shifted. Mary spoke first. We need a lawyer. Not next week. Not tomorrow.
Now.
Janelle was already reaching for her phone. I know someone who specializes in asset protection, she said. I'm calling before this gets worse. Kody bristled. You're acting like we've already lost. This is a misunderstanding. We don't need outsiders. But the confidence sounded thinner now. Even Robin's attempt to steady things fell flat. Glenn wouldn't put us in danger. He's invested in us. In our vision. Janelle shot her a look sharp enough to slice glass. Invested in you, maybe, she said coldly. Don't confuse that with investing in all of us. She stepped into the hallway, her voice shifting quickly from polite to urgent. Yes, that's the amount. No, it's not tied to the trust. Yes, repayments are coming from multiple accounts. I understand. Inside, Mary was already scribbling notes, loan officers, county clerks, filing numbers. We're pulling everything, she said.
Deeds. Yeah.
Amendments. If this is cross-collateralized, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Kody finally snapped. You're feeding into her paranoia. Christine's been waiting to tear this family apart, and you're handing her the matches. But his voice cracked. He was scared. Janelle returned, ending the call with a sharp click. We're meeting tomorrow morning. First step? Freeze transfers from shared accounts until we know exactly where repayments are coming from. Robin's eyes widened. You can't freeze accounts we all use. Janelle didn't blink. Watch me. Mary was already drafting a discreet inquiry to the recorder's office, framing it as routine, careful not to alert anyone connected to Harkness. The plan was simple. Get the documents. Confirm the exposure. Decide how much stayed behind closed doors. But even as they strategized, the leak had already begun. A family friend overheard part of Christine's reveal. A text was sent. Then another. By the end of the night, a tabloid stringer had the tip. And by morning, it was everywhere. The headlines were brutal. $850, 000, family fund at risk. Mysterious loan links Brown clan to out-of-state developer. The photos were even worse. Unflattering candids of Kody at a gas station, mid-expression, frozen in a frame that felt almost symbolic. When Kody saw the headline flash across his phone, he didn't yell. He exhaled slowly. They think they've caught us red-handed, he muttered. But the word us hung in the air. Because for Christine, Janelle, and Mary, there was no us anymore. The united front was gone. From Utah, Christine read the coverage and let out a sharp, humorless laugh. She posted a cryptic Instagram story, a coffee mug and a caption, nothing like a little morning karma. Fans connected the dots instantly. Janelle was in full damage control mode. The story's going viral, she warned. We've got maybe 48 hours before creditors start asking questions. Robin looked pale. How do we get ahead of it? The numbers are out. People are going to assume the worst. They don't have to assume, Mary replied flatly. They just have to follow the pattern. Kody slammed his phone onto the table. Enough. I'll handle the press. Janelle's response was calm and devastating.
No.
You're the last person who should speak right now. You'll make it worse. Even Robin didn't argue. Then came the real blow. A popular YouTube investigative channel released a 20-minute breakdown of every Brown property transaction over the past 15 years. Purchases, sales, LLC transfers, cross-reference screenshots pulled straight from public records. Nothing illegal on its face. Just laid out. Cleanly. Chronologically. Within 12 hours, it had 500,000 views. By afternoon, the narrative shifted from mysterious loan to pattern of questionable deals. And once the internet labels something a pattern, there's no rewinding it. Even longtime supporters began asking hard questions. The silence from the family only made it louder. In a rare moment of blunt honesty, Mary looked directly at Kody. This isn't about money anymore, she said quietly. It's about trust. And you've burned through most of it. For once, Kody had no comeback. He just stared at the headlines, as if realizing too late that the structure he'd been building for years might now be the very thing collapsing around him. It was cinematic. The precise second a private crisis turned into a public reckoning. Because once you start tracing money, you end up tracing truth. And truth doesn't stop at LLCs or loan documents. It leads straight to whoever set the entire thing in motion. Now the question isn't whether the family survives the hit. It's whether Kody does.
So what do you think?
Is this just another storm he can charm his way through? Or is this the moment the empire finally cracks? Drop your thoughts below, hit like, and stay tuned, because what's coming next might change everything.